Of all the figures who stand on the balcony of Buckingham Palace, draped in centuries of ceremony, watched by millions, the one the world cannot stop looking at is the smallest. He is the boy who covers his ears when the planes roar overhead. He is the one who pulls faces during solemn parades, who waves long after everyone else has stopped, who seems, in the most public family on earth, to be the only person behaving like an ordinary child. His name is Prince Louis. And here is the strange truth at the heart of his story. The child who appears the least burdened by it all, the freest, the most carefree of them, holds a place that was shaped by centuries of law, by a war, and by a single deliberate decision made by a queen who would not live to see him grow up. Because Louis, for all his lightness, was almost not a prince at all. To understand how that is possible, you have to go back to a spring morning in London. On the 23rd of April, 2018, at 11:01 in the morning, Catherine, then the Duchess of Cambridge, gave birth to her third child at St. Mary's Hospital. He was the third child and second son of Prince William, and from the moment of his arrival, the machinery of royal tradition began to turn. The very next day, gun salutes were fired from the Tower of London and from Hyde Park, and the bells of Westminster Abbey rang out across the city, the ancient ways of announcing that another member of the royal line had entered the world. For 4 days, the country waited to learn his name. Then, on the 27th of April, it was announced. He would be called Louis Arthur Charles, and like everything in this family, the name was not chosen carelessly. Louis was a tribute to Lord Louis Mountbatten, the first Earl Mountbatten of Burma, a towering figure in the family's recent history and a man of deep importance to the boy's grandfather. Arthur is one of the oldest and most traditional names in British royalty, carried in the names of both his father, William, and his grandfather. And Charles, of course, was a direct nod to that same grandfather, the man who would soon become king. In 3 short names, the whole weight of the family's past was quietly placed upon a newborn child. From birth, he was styled His Royal Highness Prince Louis of Cambridge. But that title, the one that seems so natural now, was the result of a decision that most people never think about. And without it, his life would have begun under a different name entirely. The story of why goes back more than 100 years to 1917, to a Britain at war. King George V sat on the throne, and the country was locked in a brutal conflict with Germany. The royal family carried a German name, Saxe-Coburg-Gotha, inherited through generations of European marriages, and at a moment when anything German was viewed with suspicion and anger, that name had become a liability. So George V did something dramatic. He swept the old name away and created a new one, drawn from one of the family's English castles. He called the royal house the House of Windsor. It sounded English. It sounded solid. It sounded like it belonged to the soil of Britain. And it has remained the name of the monarchy ever since, through war, through scandal, through loss, a symbol of stability in a century that offered very little of it. But George V did something else in that same period. He decided that royal titles had been spreading too widely, handed out to too many distant relatives, and he moved to limit them. In a formal legal instrument known as letters patent, he ruled that only the children and the male-line grandchildren of a monarch would automatically be entitled to be called His or Her Royal Highness. Great-grandchildren, as a rule, would not qualify, unless they stood very close to the throne. For most of the century, this hardly mattered, because it was rare for a monarch to live long enough to even have great-grandchildren. But Queen Elizabeth II was not most monarchs. Her reign stretched on for 70 years, longer than any in British history. And as it did, a problem quietly emerged. Her great-grandchildren were arriving, and under the old rule of 1917, the younger ones would not automatically be princes or princesses at all. So the Queen made a choice. On the 31st of December 2012, before any of William's children had even been born, she issued letters patent of her own. In it, she declared that all of the children of the eldest son of the Prince of Wales, meaning all of William's children, would carry the title of prince or princess, and the style of royal highness, no matter where they happened to fall in the line of succession. It was a deliberate act of foresight, made years in advance, to protect the standing of a generation not yet born. That single decision is the reason Prince Louis is a prince. Without it, under the older rules, the youngest son of William would not have qualified, and he would have grown up with a far more ordinary style. Instead, because of a document signed by his great-grandmother before he existed, he was a prince from his very first breath. The carefree boy on the balcony owes his title not to chance, but to a queen who looked decades into the future and quietly arranged things in his favor. There is one more twist in his position, and it tells you a great deal about how the monarchy has changed. For most of its history, the British crown followed a rule that favored sons over daughters. A younger boy would leap ahead of his older sisters in the line of succession simply because he was male. But shortly before Louis was born, the rules were changed under an agreement reached among the Commonwealth nations, replacing that old preference with one based purely on the order of birth. And so Louis holds a quiet historical distinction. He is the first British prince to be ranked in the line of succession behind an elder sister, his sister Princess Charlotte. He was born fifth in line, and following the death of Queen Elizabeth and his grandfather's accession to the throne, he now stands fourth. In his very position, the boy embodies a more modern, more equal monarchy than the one his great-grandmother was born into. And yet, for all this weight of law and history resting on his small shoulders, what the world actually fell in love with was something far simpler. It was his complete, unguarded humanity. The moment that made him a global star came in June of 2022, during the Platinum Jubilee, the 4 days of celebration marking 70 years of the Queen's reign. On the first day, at the great military parade known as Trooping the Color, the family gathered on the famous palace balcony to watch a flypast by the Royal Air Force. The planes thundered overhead, loud and overwhelming. And 4-year-old Louis did exactly what any 4-year-old would do. He clamped his hands over his ears, screwed up his face, and let out a yell to drown out the noise, right next to his great-grandmother, the Queen. Within minutes, the image had raced around the world. It became an instant meme, shared and adored by millions, not in mockery, but with pure affection. What made the moment even more touching was what came after. Once the planes had passed, the elderly Queen and her tiny great-grandson struck up a conversation on the balcony, the boy pointing up at the sky, the monarch leaning in to listen. It was a glimpse of something the public rarely gets to see, the oldest and the youngest of a famous family, simply being a great-grandmother and a great-grandson on an ordinary, extraordinary day. And as the national anthem played, Louis finished his appearance with a little dance, entirely unbothered by the cameras trained on his every move. He was not finished stealing the weekend. At the grand finale, the Platinum Jubilee pageant, he was seen pulling faces in the royal box, covering his mother's mouth with his hand, sticking out his tongue, doing all the things small children do when they have run out of patience for grown-up ceremonies. His mother tried gently to settle him. The internet adored every second of it. There was even a small, poignant detail in his outfit that longtime royal watchers noticed. For Trooping the Color, Louis wore a sailor suit, the very same style his father William had worn to the same event as a 2-year-old, decades earlier. The past and the present, stitched together in a child's clothing. It would be easy to dismiss all of this as nothing more than cute, but it was more than that, and the people running the monarchy surely understood it. For an institution often seen as cold, distant, stiff, and impossibly formal, Prince Louis offered something money cannot buy and no public relations campaign can manufacture. He offered realness. In a sea of polished uniforms and rehearsed waves, here was a child being genuinely, helplessly himself. And in doing so, he reminded the entire world that behind the palace gates was simply a family, trying to keep a restless little boy entertained through a very long ceremony, exactly as families everywhere do. His mother's response mattered just as much as his antics. Rather than showing frustration or trying to hide him away, Catherine was seen leaning in close, talking him through the moment, staying calm and warm even as she gently kept him in line. Her parenting, performed unintentionally in front of the entire world, drew its own wave of admiration. People praised the balance of it, the affection paired with quiet boundaries. It was not just Louis who charmed the public. It was the glimpse of a modern family raising their children with warmth instead of cold distance. And the pattern has continued year after year. At Trooping the Color in 2023, by then 5 years old, Louis stretched his arms out dramatically on the balcony, showing off 2 small fists, while his father visibly fought back laughter. By 2025, the press had begun affectionately calling him the Prince of Faces. He had grown a little more composed with age, a little more aware, perhaps, of the cameras and the crowds. And yet he still could not quite stop himself from waving long after the rest of the family had finished, even as his older brother George quietly told him to stop, even as he was gently escorted off the balcony, still waving to the very last second. At that same appearance, he was spotted watching his grandfather, the king, closely and copying his movements, as if studying, in his own small way, what it means to be a royal. That image, the youngest child mimicking the king, captures something about where Louis actually sits in this family. He was born into the House of Windsor, that institution George V forged in the fire of the First World War, and through his father he carries a powerful double inheritance. From the royal line comes duty, tradition, and the long shadow of the crown. And from his late grandmother Diana, through the Spencer family, comes a streak of warmth, independence, and emotional openness that has visibly reshaped how this generation of royals behaves in public. Among the 3 Wales children, each seems to be settling into a different kind of role. The eldest, George, born in 2013, is the future. He stands second in line to the throne and is being raised, carefully and deliberately, to one day be king. Charlotte, born in 2015, is poised and self-assured, often seen guiding her younger brother through the rituals of public life. And then there is Louis, the youngest, born in 2018, the one with the least pressure on him, and perhaps for exactly that reason, the most freedom to simply be a child in front of the world. What lies ahead for him is genuinely uncertain, and it would be dishonest to pretend otherwise. King Charles has spoken openly of his wish for a smaller, more streamlined monarchy, with fewer working royals carrying out official duties. That ambition raises real questions about the futures of children like Louis, who will grow up royal but will never wear the crown. Royal watchers like to speculate about what grand title he might one day be given, a historic dukedom perhaps, or some new honor chosen by a future monarch. But the truth is that no one can say. Those decisions will be made years from now, by his father and grandfather and the institution itself, shaped by a world we cannot yet see. What we can say is this: the boy who seems the most ordinary of all of them is, in fact, a living record of how the monarchy works. His title exists because of a war and a name change in 1917. It was secured because a long-lived queen looked into the future and signed a document in 2012. His place in line reflects a modern decision to treat sons and daughters as equals. Centuries of law and strategy converge on one small child who, on the day the planes flew over, was mostly just annoyed by the noise. And maybe that is the real reason the world cannot look away from him. In an age when people are tired of things that feel staged and managed and false, Prince Louis offers the opposite. He is unscripted. He is genuine. He has done more to make the British monarchy feel human, feel relatable, feel lovable than any carefully worded statement ever could. He did it not by trying, but simply by being himself, a child carrying a weight he does not yet understand, with a lightness the rest of his family can only envy. One day, the faces and the waving will give way to duty, as they always do in this family. But for now, the youngest Windsor remains exactly what he has always been, The smallest figure on the balcony, and somehow the one everyone remembers.